Now, to what degree should you tolerate hunger? Very individualized. This is something that I really think like it has to be relative to what's the potentiation of weight gain, like weight regain after the fat loss phase. So now this is a different conversation when we're looking at a contest prep client or someone who's getting on stage versus someone who is just trying to get into better shape, just trying to achieve a leaner physique. If you're someone who is going into contest prep with the expectation that like, hey, I know I'm going to be a little hungry, but I don't want to feel that chronically. I'm going to tell you, like contest prep, if you've never done it before, you're going to feel that probably a lot of the time, like majority of the time. And then eventually, for me at least, like the hunger just becomes an everyday thing. It becomes something that like meal to meal, like at a certain point, like you finish a meal and you're like, I want to repeat that same meal immediately upon finishing it. That was not enough. Your methods of dealing with that, of coping with it, I mean, a lot of it's going to be intrinsic. A lot of it's going to be remembering, okay, here's the trade-off. I'm getting this, getting to this destination of stage. Like it's very objective. It ends at a certain point, and I know that I'm not going to try to sustain this body fat level. Therefore, the weight is going to come back on, and I'm not going to feel this hunger indefinitely. Now, I think this can become very slippery and compounding when you're not in contest prep, when you're just losing body fat, yet you're dealing with a high degree of hunger. And the expectation is, okay, well, I want to lose the weight. I want to get it off. I don't want to regain it. If you are not at the physique that you want to walk around at, and you're not necessarily trying to achieve like this crazy low body fat, yeah, there needs to be the consideration. Like you need to establish the point in which, okay, can I sustain this general level of hunger? Because yeah, like food's going to go up in that case. Like you're not going to be at those calories forever, but you're also not going to be, more than likely, eating in a hefty surplus, because the goal after a fat loss phase, a non-contest prep fat loss phase, is to likely not regain the weight, or at least not regain all of it. And if that's the case, like, I think it's really important to be able to assess, be like, okay, what are the things on a daily basis that I'm willing to experience? What are the feelings, like physiologically, mentally? What can I handle? Because the more that you push through that, the more that you are like, no, like I'm just disassociate, I'll just suck it up, I'll just keep going. The more frequently you have to do that, the greater likelihood is that you're probably going to go off track. And it's not to say there aren't tools, there aren't ways that you can manage that hunger, and there's a lot of ways you can go about it. But for each person, myself included, like there's still a point that if you continue down that path, kind of are setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up to eventually be non-adherent, which it's okay to be non-adherent if you accept the consequences. I say that very loosely because I'm not promoting, I'm not pushing you to be in this like hyper restrictive state. I think you should go through phases where you're eating at least at a maintenance. You should probably go through phases. Most people listening to this should go through a period where you're eating in a slight surplus. But the criteria, I guess the condition that like needs to be understood is that even when eating at maintenance or eating a little bit more food than your fat loss, than when you're in a deficit, you still need to be able to be on track. Like you still need to have some kind of structure and methodology to how you're approaching your diet. And if you continue to dig yourself into this hole where dietary fatigue is excessive, well, eventually you're going to break. And that's the point I want to avoid people getting to whenever they're losing body fat. I don't want them to get to the point where they just start being impulsive with food decisions. And this is, again, like I want to stress this heavily. This is for individuals who like they're all on board with this. If you're like, hey, I modulate my calories and my body composition intuitively, and I like how I look, and I'm okay with slight fluctuations up and down, sick, okay, continue doing that to your discretion. But this is more for the person. This is more speaking to the individual who's like, unless I'm following a structured plan, I feel like I'm gaining too much weight. I feel like the way that I eat, I need direction even on a regular basis, even when I'm not trying to lose body fat, because I don't feel like eating intuitively results in the outcome that I'm striving for, i.e., it typically results in me gaining body fat. Okay, being able to at least establish, okay, like this might be a little uncomfortable, but I can still tolerate it along the way throughout your fat loss phase, while accepting that while you're getting to that destination, this is what you're signing up for. You're signing up to be not as full, not as satiated, not eating aimlessly. And I think when we're really looking at like when you should cut that off, it's to the point where adherence begins to go out the window. When you start to have impulses that maybe you act on, maybe you do overindulge, and okay, like it's a one-time occurrence. You have, if you're coaching yourself, you have a conversation with yourself. Yeah, I don't like how I ate yesterday, but that was just a one-time thing. I'm not going to make that a regular occurrence. Okay, sick. If it's something that repeatedly you're going off track, and then you begin to experience that like guilt shame cycle of like, oh, I feel terrible now, and I don't want to assess my physique, which is like, this is coming from real experiences that clients share with me. If that's where you're at, then we need to take a step back. We need to assess, okay, how long are we going to continue to push the diet? How many more pounds of body fat are we going to pull off? If we continue to accrue dietary fatigue without implementing some kind of intervention in order to drop off that dietary fatigue, what does that look like after the diet? Does that put you in a position where you can still follow even your maintenance calories or your slight surplus calories? Because typically for like a contest prep, the hardest part post show, and I mean, like I put this up as a Q&A, what's the hardest, put it up early June. And a lot of people they're like, it's staying on track, knowing that I don't have that goal ahead of me, knowing that I'm not moving in the direction of having an improved physique, having something to run towards. And that's what I want to avoid. For the non-prep client, we don't need to dig you into this hole, or I really like the analogy with like accruing debt in a fat loss phase. I fucking wish I would have started with that to begin with, because I think it'd make a lot more sense. Accruing like dietary fatigue, it really is something that like it can't be avoided. But if you accrue so much debt that at the end of the diet, or even like at post diet, at the tail end of the diet, you're like just waiting for your coach to tell you like you can have a meal off track because you've got all these ideas, all these foods that you want to eat, you want to indulge in. It's like we're probably at the point where we need to have those interventions in place. Because if you don't, I mean, ultimately you're just putting yourself in a position where you're probably going to eat in a way that you don't want to. Probably going to slip up. And if that's something that begins to affect your adherence in other regards, okay, maybe you slip up on your diet, so then you're not as keen to get your water in, or you're not motivated to get into the gym because now you feel like maybe in your physique it's like it's reflected that you've not been as disciplined. If that's the case, if you're beginning to experience those like, I want to say like psychological adaptations, well then we got to assess. We got to assess what we're doing. This week I had a client who she had asked, she was like, hey, I know I'm not hitting the target rate of change that initially we were hoping for. We still have like 4 or 5 weeks left on her fat loss phase. It's a structured fat loss phase. So it's not a mini cut where it's very short. It's only like 4 to 6 weeks. It's like a 10 to 12 week cut. And she's like, I want to push if you think it's necessary. Because right now, like my target weight that I want to end the diet at, right now I'm not on track to hit that, because I've had a few weeks where instead of hitting 1.2% change each week, I hit like 0.8 or 0.5%. And that's where like having that conversation with her, I'm like, we can push, but frankly, like the adaptations that you've reported, the things that you've mentioned, like you're really, really hungry and you're having cravings. And even though we've like modified the diet, we're trying like, high low days now to see if that like staves off some of the hunger. And what I told her is, I'm like, honestly, I think we're at the upper limit of what you can handle in terms of a deficit. If the goal is to not regain the weight very rapidly post diet. This also, you also have to consider things like, okay, do you have a period coming up where, like, even if you wanted to, you're not going to be able to track as consistently? Do you have a vacation plan? Do you have a work trip planned where, frankly, like, you can try to be adherent, but like, you're going to have meals out that are hard to track. They're not going to be as accurate in terms of food reporting. In those cases, especially, I think it's important to be conservative and to underbid in terms of like the deficit we're creating. Like, yeah, get to your goal, get to where you want to be, but not at the expense of now putting yourself in a position where in this next period of life, you're like, I'm going to be in a different country for, 10 to 14 days. Like, I want you to enjoy it. I want you to be able to indulge a little bit. I don't want you to go off the rails. I don't want you to binge. I don't want you to become obsessive with food, because again, all of those things, like you can add on a lot of weight very quickly. And then what do you know? Okay, you finished a 10 to 12 week fat loss period, a fat loss phase, but now you're in a position where you're ready to do it again. Yet there hasn't been enough time post diet for you to really become re-regulated. Still carrying around some fatigue from that, even though, body fat is higher. It's very similar to like that post-show period, but I think this isn't something a lot of people consider. I don't think it's something that a lot of people think about when making decisions in the diet itself.